You want to win some amazing jazz vinyl today? Just subscribe to our channel or page, share this broadcast with other music junkies, and tell us your favorite jazz artists and albums. A new winner will be chosen every week. Good luck. And now, join us for a discussion on jazz piano. I look very forward to reading your comments and suggestions. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the show. It's coming. Hey folks, welcome to Vinyl Junkies. I'm joined here today for our topic by Andrew Rossiter of Org Music. Hey Andrew.
Hey Sam, how you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for joining me. Andrew and I will be talking about piano jazz for this episode of Digging the Bins. The reason it is that I thought it'd be good is because, well, his label Org Music put out a bunch of fantastic piano jazz. So, you know, it's a natural topic. What it is that it does is it gives me a chance to show you guys what we're giving away. Seriously, check these prizes out. 4-record pack, okay? All from Org Music. What you got to do is share this and tell us, listen, who are your favorite piano players? What albums would you consider? Let's say that's what the topic of the show is going to be. What albums would you consider? What albums would you suggest to somebody who's trying to start their piano stacks? So what it is that I'm showing right now to the folks is the Black Lion record, Thelonious Monk, the London Sessions. There's 3 volumes of this. We're going to be giving away 1 volume, volume 2. Dave Brubeck, Time In, which is part of the Time series, which is coming out real soon. Roland Hanna, which we'll have a bit of a discussion about because that's an interesting record and new to me. And then finally the Bud Powell record, which is the Essen Jazz Festival concert. 2 of them are on Black Lion, so good stuff. You know, Andrew, when I started trying to put together this show, I thought to myself, okay, well, you know what? Because you have so many records that you put out of that, I thought it would be easy to do a show on piano jazz. And there's something that I realized as I was doing this. A lot of the piano jazz that I listen to isn't necessarily just the piano. So, for example, while I was checking out Duke Ellington, a lot of his stuff is big band and you don't hear the piano at all. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I think that's we talked about this a little bit before. I mean, with an ensemble or a big band, even with a trio or a quartet, if you got other instruments, I mean, it's just jazz, right? Maybe you got the leader who's stretching out a little bit more on the piano. Maybe it's in a situation like that with a big band where you hardly hear it. But the interesting thing for me about piano jazz is, you can have a solo record. You can have someone playing bass, rhythm, and lead all at the same time. That's pretty unique. You don't get that with a lot of instruments in jazz.
You're right.
Maybe guitar here and there, but it's the players who do that. It's something special.
Yeah, and actually, I'm putting up Earl Father Hines, another record on Black Line that you put out, because I think that's probably a good example. What it is that I found, it wasn't a challenge, it was just an interesting workaround that allowed me to view my records in a completely different light. And I realized, wait a second, if you're going to do a piano, like for me, the way I thought about it is, let's say I'm making a mixtape, okay? All right, well, what Duke Ellington song am I going to put on? I mean, it's incontested, right? It's uncontested that Duke Ellington is the base, the absolute base of early jazz music, along with, King Oliver and a whole bunch of other people. But if you listen to a lot of his early stuff, it's all big band. So,
yeah,
are we doing a big band show or are we doing a piano show? It posed a little bit of a challenge, right? Because in that mixtape that we make, does that really qualify as piano jazz? Let's say you're looking at that. Would you put that, what Duke Ellington song would you put on a mixtape? Most of it is,
Right. I get you. And that's the thing. When I say, calling it piano jazz is a little misleading when you're talking about big band. I don't know that you would call it piano jazz. I think you'd call it big band in a lot of senses. Obviously, Duke's amazing, right? He's one of the quintessential jazz pianists. But
certainly
he's it really depends on what recording you're listening to. And I don't like to get into, classifying things too much, because it's all just jazz, right? It's all good music.
Yeah. Well, no, you see, the thing is that I think what makes this fun for me is not that we're classifying it or trying to put it in boxes, as much as we're just kind of trying to make the connections between one thing and another. Okay, so for example, when I talk about the Duke Ellington, it seems inconceivable that we don't talk about him during a piano jazz show. And of course, we'll talk about a bunch of other people. But when I look at the two records, for example, that I would say represent a good part of his career, okay, I have something that I'm hoping you're going to elaborate on. But Duke Ellington and His Orchestra, Volume 1, which is 1943. It isn't very, very, very early in his career, but it's his big band stuff. And then, Ellington live at Newport, which was just something else, But there are different periods of his career. Like, he recorded all of the early Columbia sides, and then he did the stuff that you put out, the stuff he recorded for radio, right? It was live radio broadcast.
Right. Yeah, it was the World Transcription Series. So they actually did. I mean, there's a ton of those records. We took the first 2 volumes and kind of condensed it down to one record, because there was a lot of false starts and alternate takes and stuff. So that copy you were just holding is basically the best of the first 2 volumes of that long series, and we will probably continue that series. I mean, it sounds really great. There's some great stuff in there. There's some stuff that maybe could be cut out, but let me know what you think about it.
I mean, I gave everything a good listen. I made sure that I was prepped for the show, and listen, I thought it was amazing. The thing is that when I'm listening to a lot of this older music, I realize that a lot of times tapes don't exist. You're taking it from acetates. You're taking it from a whole. The source can be dubious when it comes to really early period stuff. So 43, if I'm going to hear something that might not be there, I won't have a problem with it. If that same thing is happening during the 60s, then it's a different thing, because the 60s was recorded very differently. In terms of the music, I mean, I think that Duke Ellington is somebody that is mandatory. It's so ironic. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, I mean, look, these are not, we do a lot of different jazz records, right? Some of them are audiophile records, and some of them are, taken from broadcast recordings, right? They're historic, they're important, they're, still fun to listen to, and they're great. And we do our best, we work with mastering engineers that this is what they do. They clean up these recordings as much as they can. They make it as quiet as they can when they, they do their thing, right? And we get as good of a record as we can out of those recordings that either came off of acetates or came off of, mediums that are a little bit tougher to work with. When we get into the 60s, when we get into taking stuff from tape, then it's a different story, right?
It's a different animal. So the thing is that you do have to take into consideration the source. And whether you like it or not, technology's come a long way. So this idea of taking it directly from tape up to a certain point is a myth, because a lot of stuff, this tape that we're talking about, simply doesn't exist. When you get a record that's taken straight from those tapes, then you have something special. We don't see as much. So for that sense, especially when it comes to the older music, I'm comfortable with mistakes, if you want to call them that, because to me, I think it's just the medium itself, so there's no point in arguing it.
I mean, I wouldn't call it a mistake. I mean, I think you look at the Paramount Blues recordings. You look at some of these
absolutely
great music. They didn't have the means to record it the same way as they started to do in the 60s, and even in the 50s. There was some better stuff, but it's not that it's bad. It's not that it's a mistake. They were doing what they could with what they had, right? And it's still, for me, it's still fun to listen to. It doesn't have to be the quietest recording, quietest pressing for every. So
I agree. Absolutely, I agree. And the fact is that I loved playing with these records so much, and I dug into your catalog because every record wound up typifying exactly what we talk about all the time. It's about that qualitative experience. And reading those liner notes and then researching, I come out of this show knowing far more about piano jazz than I did just a week ago, because just for the due fact that, well, you know, if you're going to present something, then do it properly. Like, for example, can I tell a Father Hines story? I'd like to know what made you choose this Father Hines record. It's a Black Lion recording, so I know that you guys put out a lot of them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we and there are more Earl Hines in the Black Lion catalog that we're planning to get to. It's a great record. I mean, first and foremost, it's a great record. It hadn't been pressed in decades and decades. I'm a big fan of Earl Father Hines. He, especially his early kind of New Orleans traditional style stuff he did with Louis Armstrong. But you know, this record, you know, I'm also a big sucker for solo piano records, right? Like we talked about.
Yes.
We're actually doing a Earl Hines tribute to Louis Armstrong record coming up, which hasn't been announced yet, so maybe I shouldn't talk about it. But
I love it.
It's another Earl Hines solo piano record he recorded just a couple weeks after Louis died. You know, they were best friends.
Well, contentious, but yes.
Contentious, but you know, as good friends it often are.
Yes.
And it's you feel it. You know, you feel the kind of the somberness in his playing, and it's an amazing record. But I'm just a big Earl Hines fan in general, so no particular reason we picked out that record, except that we were trying to rejuvenate this Black Lion catalog, and it was of the couple, I think maybe 3 that they have. I have to check back. It was the one that I wanted to start with because I think it was my favorite of the 3.
Well, what was fun about this is that I've placed the org catalog in a certain place. Now I've been working with your catalog for just over a year and a half. So it took me a while, and it's important that like you absorb the catalog so you can kind of place it. For me, I take my archive very seriously. So I listen to the records, but I want it. Records, what makes that experience so good is the connections that we make. Okay? So naturally, I take this show seriously because to me, this is the show that we present. We're nerding out on this music that we care about. So I go out and I research this stuff as I'm listening to it, and I immerse myself in exactly the same experience that we're selling. Okay? The idea of a tactile, important, a sit-down meal versus drive-through. Okay? So as I was reading all of this, first thing that came to mind was, dude, I got maybe 500 jazz records or something more, and I don't know jazz at all. I don't know piano jazz at all. That's the first thing that came to mind. So your Earl Father Hines record was one of the first ones that kind of led me to approach the music specifically from the point of view of the piano. Because prior to the show, when I thought of a piano player, immediately, again, we go back to Duke Ellington, immediately Duke Ellington comes to mind. But
Sam, you're not going to tell me you didn't know piano jazz. How many Monk records do you have in your catalog? Come on.
50. Yeah. But you
Give
know,
me a break.
Yeah, okay, fair, you know. But
yeah.
Check.
But
dude.
yeah, we're you know, we always can learn more, right? We can dive deeper. We can get more obscure. That's where the fun stuff happens, right?
I absolutely love that. Here I am looking for the cover. Okay, listen. So I will straight up tell you, just this is about conversation for me. This is about us having fun. Okay? So this is me having fun. I'll straight up admit to you guys that I didn't know this until this very morning. But this is what I did this morning. I came down, I made myself a coffee. The remnants are still here. Smoked a joint and do what I do, preparing for the show. So I'm listening to some of this stuff. Again, I'd listened to it a few times, but this time I wanted to dig into the notes a bit. So Earl Hines, I put it on, and I had already read the liner notes, but I realized how little I knew about this guy. Like you were saying, for example, the Louis Armstrong connection, it actually goes a lot further than that. As I was doing my reading, I realized that it's just the guy's really one of the people who invented the language of jazz piano to begin with, and the reason that he hooked up with Louis Armstrong and they decided to work together is because Louis was coming into where he lived. I think he comes from Kansas. I don't remember exactly, but he comes from Kansas, okay? And he grew up, his father was very, very much into music and encouraged him to play music. He encouraged him to play the trumpet. But the trumpet would cause his ears to hurt. So he had to give it up. But the trumpet is what it was that he was attracted to. So what he did is, because his ears would hurt, is he played piano. All this is to say that he heard music in his head, or he started figuring it out with a trumpet. He's trying to become, he's trying to get known. He's trying to become something. He waits until Louis Armstrong comes in from his band so that he seizes an opportunity to play with him. Louis Armstrong says, yeah, I love what you do. It's like, really? So yeah, we play the same music. Is there, you play your piano like I play my trumpet. And, a friendship was born in a club where, he then told him, it's like, well, I started off with a trumpet, and the reason I can't play it is, right? So they started off with basically almost the same building blocks as they were creating this music, man. It's the best.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I'll have to send you the, that connection runs deep, but I'll have to send you the record that, it won't be coming out for a couple months, but the tribute to Louis, I mean, the liner notes on that thing are pretty great. I think you're going to get a kick out of them. I mean, there's some sad stuff in there, obviously, because he's talking about just hearing about Louis's death, but there's also some good anecdotal stories about them being out a little too late, having too much to drink. Louis ending up on the floor, forgetting his lip balm, right?
See, that's what I want to hear, man.
That's the fun stuff, right?
Well, the thing is that look. Every time I do this stuff, man, I get so excited because it's just the stories just keep coming out. As I'm reading, man, this again, all this morning, but I remember it. It's like I can't wait to tell you guys. Supposedly, at one point, they were all trying to make out their thing, and there was a break that happened between Louis. Anyway, Earl Hines went out and made his own group. And his own group was really, to the level of Duke Ellington, very, very popular. They'd really pack him in. He moved to Chicago, and he'd have up to 28 members in his band playing. Okay, eventually, big band dried up. It's just there wasn't money for that. Rock and roll came in. People weren't buying jazz records anymore. The war made it so that records weren't being produced. It's a completely different thing. So, and there's this thing that bebop happened. It's hard to tour
with a 30-piece band, right?
Yeah, it's hard to tour with a 30-piece band. So a lot of these bands just died. And Earl Hines disappeared for a while. We'll get back to that whole period again. But Earl Hines disappeared for a while because he couldn't get any work. Okay, and he winds up eventually even opening up a tobacco shop and supporting himself like that. It's only afterwards, only after a period, and this is when your record was released, okay? I think it was 1960 or 65. He'd already been out of music, and somebody invited him to play in New York, just at a conservatory, something like that, and it sparked interest in his music all over again, and it provided Father Hines, I'm going to give you the floor soon. It provided Father Hines with a different way of playing his music. In other words, where it is that I was talking about how a lot of this early big band stuff, you cannot kind of put it on a piano jazz compilation because it's big band, right? Earl Father Hines, his second career is exactly this over here, and that's him just playing the piano. And after having helped Louis create this big band, after being at the very fucking beginning of bebop. He was on that record, the famous Massey Town Hall concert?
Yeah.
Charles Mingus, fucking Charlie Parker. He was on that.
I mean, look at you go back to his credits. He's on, I mean, it's shocking how much he's on. But you're right. I mean, he really comes to shine kind of after the fact, right? After the big band period where he's, you hear him doing his solo stuff. He learns to play in a new way, and he's out there. The big kind of swell of European interest in jazz also helped at that time.
It kept these guys afloat.
Right.
I mean, jazz people were hailed as heroes out in Europe, out in France especially, you know, and I mean, it's a story I've told already, but it's just so much so that when Miles Davis went there, when he returned, he got so depressed, he wound up getting hooked on drugs. But yeah, they were hailed as really cultural heroes. It was a completely different appreciation. The thing that I found interesting also about Father Hines is, as you read about these musicians, it's just, there's always the story about these guys being on the road and not being able to find a hotel because they won't serve black people. They can't get any food, getting hassled by the cops. Earl Hines at one point, I think in 45, was drunk and got stopped by a cop and basically beaten to the point where he got beaten senseless. He got beaten until his brain wasn't the same anymore. Which basically caused him to start acting erratically from that period onwards. And he was supposedly quite a handful to work with because of that. And spent some time in a mental hospital. Supposedly, yeah, because he was also this volatile guy, really tough to deal with. He, just years later, after he'd spent a few stints...
I'd be volatile too, right? I mean,
yeah.
That's... You go through something like that.
Yeah, well, no, look, he took a fucking shot to the head, right? A little while later, a bunch of years later, he gets hit in the head again with a fucking wine bottle by a patron because he started a fight with him. All this is to say that by the time he's putting out this record over here, Earl Hines, the one that you guys put out, Tour de Force, he doesn't have his marbles anymore. As a matter of fact, he couldn't, like, he could still play, but he could only play stuff he knew. You couldn't ask him to vamp, you couldn't ask him to play any new arrangements, but they knew that if you put him on your record, he'll be able to play all the old stuff. And that album is a perfect example of it. He's like a fucking orchestra with two hands.
Right. And, you know, he's playing the standards, right? He's playing stuff he's been playing his whole life.
Yeah, I guess it would be the equivalent of... it's not even fair to say, but it would be almost the equivalent of kind of like somebody coming back for the greatest hits tour type of thing, you know, the reunion tour. But that's not fair either, because when he came back as a solo artist. Most of the stuff that he put out was solo stuff. Like, they recorded him a lot right up to his death, and he was known... Dude, I learned all of this morning. He was known as somebody...
You did a deep dive, huh?
Dude, this is what I live for, man. I'm not putting this on. I love this, you know. But he was known for a guy who can walk into a studio and come out with a full fucking record 2 hours later. He'd just bang that shit out. But he was crazy.
Right. Well, you know, the best of us are, right?
The best of us are. So, in other words, dude, as a music lover, thank you for doing what you do. It took me a while to really wrap my head around your catalog, but I begin to understand that in my archives, org represents the road less taken in terms of catalog. What I mean by that is you've shed a light on certain records that I previously would have never paid attention to, and if I paid any attention to previously, it didn't really give a chance too much. And you know what? I gotta say that a lot of times it is because of the art, but I am very much referring to, you know, what you did with the Black Lion catalog. I think that you refreshed that, and a lot of the stuff that you put out, you know, it's not Brilliant Corners by Monk. It's stuff that exists maybe just outside. It's like, it seems like your thought.
Well, go ahead. You know, sorry to cut you off.
No, go for it.
I mean, you know, I think that's been an evolution of the label. I mean, we've done that, right? We've done the Coltrane Atlantic series. We've done. I mean, you've got Dave Brubeck Time In right behind you, right? That's not an obscure record by any means. But we've also gone after some stuff that's very left field, that's more obscure, that maybe, you know, the names aren't as obscure, but people had never heard a lot of these recordings that we're putting out. And that's the fun part. You know, we're turning people on either to new artists or new records, new recordings that they hadn't heard in the past, and connecting the dots for some people. Hopefully, that's the aim, right? Well, and it's everything from punk rock to free jazz. and
Yes.
everything in between.
Well, these shows are exactly that. They're about connecting the dots. It's about putting a story behind something and giving that record maybe just a different angle to listen to it from. Like Roland Hanna, is that where it is that I should go? I'm wondering if I should go Roland Hanna or I should go Dave Brubeck. Let's go Dave Brubeck for a second
Let's
because, sorry,
let's go, Dave Brubeck. I'm sorry to cut you off. Could we pause for just a moment? My computer is I got to
no,
change my charger here.
no, we
For
can't,
some
man.
reason, I don't want to lose you.
Okay, what it is that I'll do then is I'll go on. Yeah, I'll just vamp with Dave Brubeck. Do what you got to do, no problem. In
Okay.
putting together the show, what it is that we wanted to do was kind of give you a little bit of an intro, which is to say that if we had to suggest records to you that you can start a piano jazz collection around, which records would we suggest? So I came up with a few, and that was really the call to action when it comes to you guys, right? Asking you, what records would you suggest to somebody who wants to put together those jazz stacks? And in doing that, I wanted to make sure that it's music that focused on the piano, not just, again, the Duke Ellington thing. And one of the first ones that came to mind, which will lead us to Time In, but was Time Out, a record basically that didn't usher in West Coast jazz, but it was certainly the pinnacle, I would say, of West Coast jazz in terms of popularity. It features Brubeck just playing a whole bunch of time signatures, which of course is why the album's called Time Out, but in such an accessible way, such a playful way that just caught on with everybody. And they came from the West Coast, which is very different than the music that was coming from the East Coast, which was a bit more, post-boppy, beboppy, more technical. Where it is that the West Coast jazz came in was that they wanted it's kind of like the music had to sound a bit more like the weather and the atmosphere that was there. The
Cool
musicians...
jazz.
Cool jazz. Yeah, no, actually, I'm going more West Coast. Yeah, cool
Okay.
goes
Yeah.
really much cooler. But yeah, with West Coast, how Dave Brubeck came in and, ushered a lot of that, along with the Chet Bakers, and there's a whole bunch more. But Time Out seems like the perfect thing to start your collection with because it's real easy to get into. But I'm curious as to this other one here, Time In. It's a new one to me, okay? And I do have a bunch of Brubeck records around the theme of time. Time Further Out and a whole bunch of others. What's the deal behind that?
Behind the series or behind our record, this Time In record specifically?
Bring it all together for me, because a lot of his records came out, his most popular records came out with the theme of time. So Time Out, Time Further Out, Time In, and so forth. Time Out sold over 1 million copies. Doesn't happen very much in jazz, but it did. So, I mean, that whole series, do you know anything like what it is that brought that together? Was there like a thematic thing or?
Behind the Time series, I wouldn't be the best person to speak to, his reasoning for the for that series. I wish I was a little bit more informed on it. I was just always a huge fan of those records. And for me, Time In was always one of my favorites, and I never understood why Time Out got so much attention compared to Time. I mean, they're all great records, right? Time Further Out's a good one too. But the reason I went after Time In was just because I could never find a good clean copy. It had been out of print for so long. But I grew up, my first intro to jazz really as a kid was Dave Brubeck Time Out. A friend of mine turned me on to that.
You grew up on the West Coast?
In middle school. No. I grew up in the Midwest, but
okay.
I mean that was the first it was a CD handed to me at the time, but that was the first jazz album that I think I owned actually was Time Out. So I dug deep into Brubeck, into those records and into some of his other records. And Time In was just one I never understood why it didn't get a little bit more attention. So we tried to, we mastered that one from tape, and Bernie Grundman did a great job on it. And I think it sounds, as good, or if not better than the original pressing. So I'm very happy with it. I can finally play my clean copy of Time In.
Well, look, in my case, honestly, I didn't even know the record. I'd never seen it, so it kind of does play to you saying that you could never find a clean copy. I had never
Right.
seen it. In terms of, in terms of Time Out being, getting more exposure. Look, 1959, all sorts of records came out then. Mingus Album came out. Fucking John Coltrane, Giant Steps came out. Kind of Blue came out. Like all of this, all these monstrous records came out, and that's basically the year that changed jazz. They call so. It's kind of like talking metal, right? The big four are always going to be the big four. It doesn't mean that Testament weren't great and Metal Church weren't great, but the big four are the big four. That's the way they're put together. 1959, I think, is what makes that Brubeck record, that whole zeitgeist, is what probably puts a bit of attention on it.
Right. Right.
But
have you heard his sons play?
Unless it was recorded, no.
They're worth checking out. They're great. They got some. I mean, obviously they're not as popular as their dad, but they got some good stuff out there.
What it is that I liked about, you see, the thing is that I had a pretty bad preconception when it comes to jazz, and I realized, like I said, prepping for today's show really showed me how little I know, but it excites me because every day is something new to learn. It's fun. It creates the stories. But I started off with the preconception of, if it's a white player, then he can't possibly feel this because jazz is born from the blues. And, it's one of the building blocks, and the blues is black music. And, of course, I was completely wrong because somebody can still emote their experience. But it took me a long while to kind of take that off and kind of listen to something like Dave Brubeck and not judge it as immediately square because he's white and wears, rimhorn glasses. Kind of sad, eh?
Well, I get that. I mean, he doesn't exactly exude the the hipness that you find with some of these other, you look at pictures of Monk, you look at pictures of some of these guys and just shit, that guy looks awesome. I want to hang out with him, right?
Oh yeah.
Dave Brubeck looks like your high school science teacher, right?
He does.
It's so, but when I first heard the record, I didn't know what he looked like. I just heard this music and I fell in love with it.
Yeah, and I mean, the album art is pretty amazing too, right? So,
right.
I'm showing it right now, and I mean, you take a look at this. It does look actually quite a bit like Mingus Aum. There's also that connection, but I mean, yeah, it catches the eye. There's no doubt, and it came out on Columbia. That helps too. Columbia was the biggest record label at the time, but it kind of leads us a little bit into something like Thelonious Monk, if we want to go cool. One place where, I mean, we have to have the conversation of Thelonious Monk because he's another guy that just changed the language of music, and he was probably, along with Charlie Parker, looking back perhaps not coincidentally, but along with Charlie Parker, to me, Thelonious Monk was the most difficult artist to wrap my head around.
Well, there's a lot there, right? Like Earl Hines we talked about, in his early days, he's playing with bigger bands, right? He's kind of more buried in the back there. Monk's got his solo records, he's got his quartet records, he's got his big band records. And
Uh-oh. Hello? I think you just cut off. Technical difficulties. Well, what it is that I'm gonna do is keep talking until he comes back, if he does come back. But yeah, look, Monk is somebody that you cannot circumvent. He's at the very, very, very beginning of the bebop era. I wonder if we're talking over each other. Maybe we are. You're frozen, dude. You're totally frozen. I don't see you. You know what we're gonna do? We're going to end the show there. Oh, he just got hung up. No, we won't. Why don't we wait for Andrew? And I can still talk about Monk. Monk was an innovator. The thing that made it so that it was weird for me was I didn't understand what he was playing. There wasn't kind of, like, if you listen to Dave Brubeck, you can hear, you can kind of hum it. There was something a little off with Monk. And the description was always, oh, there he is. The description, let's get to Andrew. Andrew.
Yo.
I'm going on with Monk.
I lost you there.
Yeah, you did. So yeah, what I was trying to say is, with Monk, it sounds like the music wasn't just kind of like this typical melody. He would play between the notes. He would play things that weren't there. His timing also was different. There was also a percussive element to the way he played. You know, he hit the keys sometimes like a drum, and that's the thing that's so interesting about a piano, right? And like a guitar also, because there's that acoustic quality, it's not just a question of which keys, it's a question of how you hit them and in which succession. Are you hitting a couple of keys at once? How hard do you hit them? And Monk immediately seemed to add this extra dimensional quality to the music that transcended what we saw before, kind of like stride piano, you know, which is Earl Hines's, well, you know, where it is that basically it started. But yeah, that was basically my spiel on why it is that I found Monk to be so difficult to get into, because to me it was a completely different language.
It is, and I mean, my favorite thing about like you said, he's very percussive, almost in the way he plays. I mean, it's he kind of messes with the rhythms, you know, especially on his solo records. One of my favorite things about Monk, though, is that he's very self-aware, and when he plays, I mean, on Solo Monk, for instance, the record, I think I sent you a copy of our reissue. You know, he's almost toying with you. He's, you know, he knows what he's doing. He's almost, you feel like he's got a big grin on his face, like he's joking with you on some of those licks that he plays. It's almost, he's purposely like throwing in some off notes there, and it's great. You know, there's almost like a sarcasm to it that I love.
That's exactly right. He added an element that was almost not musical. It just seemed to give it a third dimension. And yeah, I kind of get it, because some of that stuff, the way it's like dun 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 dun. You know what I mean? And it's kind of, and like then it's just
he's playing with you.
And then he's just, it's like he's playing with you, and he's taking you down a path that sounds like it's fun. I mean, I'm talking about my own experience with Monk, but it sounds like it's fun, but you kind of wonder if you're gonna fucking hit a crack or something and break your leg, because it's unlike any musical journey. It's not quite as easy to follow, because he just added stuff in it, you know?
Yeah, and you know, he was a monster, right? I mean, he in terms of how he played, how good he was. I mean, he could play with the best of them. He could play really complex, fast stuff. He could also just slow it down and take it easy, right? And it I don't have a Monk record that I don't love, and that that says a lot, because I've got a lot of his records. But they're all quite different. You know, even this, I think we were talking about this record right here, this the big band and quartet record.
I don't have that one.
I got to get that to you. I mean, it's a great record. It's 63. You know, it's very much in contrast to Solo Monk, or you know, some of the London collection ones that I sent you. I think are also solo records. It's, you know, it shows that he can do both things, right? He's very capable.
I think it goes a little bit beyond that. Sorry, did I interrupt you, or did you want to finish the thought?
No. I was just going to say, you know, Monk is like, it just goes. He's a perfect example of how broad the piano jazz category is, right? Because he's versatile. And that's really the whole discussion we're having today, right? Is you know, going from Earl Father Hines to someone like Cecil Taylor, right? They're not in the same universe in terms of the type of stuff they're playing, but it's a broad category, and for good reason.
Beautiful. No, and it's funny because we are going to Cecil Taylor, but another thing that I did in preparing for this show is I'm sure you've watched Ken Burns Jazz. Ken Burns Jazz, you know, is reference material for me. So what it is that I did is I really paid attention. I've seen the movie a couple of times, but I paid attention to particular parts so that I can kind of get a feeling of the players, other than the ones that I know, dig a little deeper and put everything in a little bit of a historical perspective. And as I was watching that, when it is that they got to the episode of Thelonious Monk, they really drove home the point that is the feeling I take away from it. When you're listening to Monk, you're listening to an artist. You're not listening to a musician. The guy created his own language. And if you look at the way it is that it started, and this is all in the jazz series, in the PBS series, but if you look at the way it is that he conducted his music, he wasn't interested in playing standards. That's automatically going to be a strike one. Because if you're trying to play music, it's going to be easier to kind of like break in. Instead, he insisted on playing his own music. Not only that, but he had no support, and he insisted on not getting a job. He had to do this all the time, 24/7, completely committed to it. Okay.
Well, and if I can interject, because there are some standards that Monk does that I love, but the thing that I love about them is it's Monk. He makes it his own. He doesn't play it like you expect him to play it, and that's the thing. I mean, for me, with any jazz player, not just piano, any instrument, the most crucial thing is having a voice. When you turn on a Monk record, it's Monk.
Absolutely,
right? He plays a certain way. It has a certain character to it, right? So that's, even when he does standards, that's a perfect example of how distinct his voice is.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point I was trying to make there, you see, because when it came to recording, like he was at the very beginning of creating the language of bebop. Okay, so along with Dizzy Gillespie and along with along with Charlie Parker and all of these people, and Charles Mingus and so forth, he was there and he helped figure out the language of bebop. But as he was going further into his career and he kind of like wanted to stretch out as a composer and not really just be attached to that movement, he insisted upon playing his music and wanting his music to be played, basically took a vow of poverty until the record Brilliant Corners came out. And that's really the one that established him. And I've been looking everywhere for the cover, and of course I can't find it there, but that's the one that established him as, okay, this guy is a big deal. Before that, people knew who Monk was, but he was one of those musicians he was a musician's musician. So in other words, the people in the know knew who Monk was. Then he put out Brilliant Corners, and everything changed. All of a sudden, it's like, now I understand. And he got Columbia to do it, right? So it's like he had some money behind it. But that's where it is that he got cemented. And then, the Baroness of Jazz came in and gave him a bunch of money, a completely different thing. But yeah, that's my story.
I mean, look, we could talk Monk all day. I think we're both, piano or otherwise, he's one of my favorite players. But I did want to get into, I don't know where we're at with the podcast timing, but I did want to get to a bit of Roland or a bit of Cecil.
I'm thinking we're going to go with Cecil. I think we're going to go with Cecil because, it's a pretty obvious one. As we were talking about this idea of trying to put together kind of like a mixed bag of records that you would introduce to somebody, if I had to kind of like take a bunch of records and separate them, the reason it is that I'd put Cecil Taylor in it is because if you want something that's really different, nobody sounds like him. And I thought he was a complete original, and then I realized that there's some stuff that he took that basically stretched Monk's language further, because Monk, like I said, he would sometimes play with his elbows, he would sometimes just dance as the other guys was solo, he would do his thing. The guy was just a cool fucking cat who did his thing. Okay, Cecil Taylor went one step further and basically treated every key on the piano like a bunch of drums. So he played the instrument, and you hear it on the album that you guys put out, Silent Tongues. It's just, Silent Tongues, that was a 74 performance in Switzerland, actually. And you really hear there in full evidence how this guy is not treating his piano in the same way that, that Duke Ellington did. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. They're in different worlds, in very much the same way that, someone like Ornette Coleman is in a very different world than a lot of your your old school big band traditional jazz players, right? Um, it the whole free jazz movement just opened up this whole other world, and I think Cecil's probably the best example of that done on the piano.
I agree.
Would you agree? Yeah.
No, in terms of like, to me, um, what analogy could I use? I listened to late period Coltrane and how it is that you can take that, or let's say, you know what, in terms of like, carrying the mantle and just taking it to something else, you listen to late period Coltrane and you can hear how, Pharoah Sanders just took that and went to something else with it, or a lot of the
Right.
stuff that Alice Coltrane did, with her
The
music.
spiritual stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. How they took it and they developed the language further, but it's based on, what Coltrane was beginning to set forth with the avant-garde movement there, the new thing they used to call it. Archie Shepp was part of that as well. Could have talked about Archie Shepp. Anyway, but the deal with Cecil Taylor is, after I watched the movie Jazz again yesterday, I saw that there was the connection that I never saw before, and now I'm beginning to see that it's almost like a logical progression between a lot of the way Monk used to use his elbows on the piano, or he would use it as percussive. I actually took the time to take out a what do you call it? A quote. Reading a couple of articles. His technique has been compared to percussion, referring to the number of keys on a standard piano. Val Wilmer, he's a critic, used the phrase 88 tuned drums to describe Taylor's style. And that's exactly it. It's like he's playing 88 tuned drums. Every key is different.
Yeah, I mean and like we talked about earlier, I mean the piano provides a unique opportunity. I mean, it's not a saxophone or a trumpet. You got one note, right? One note at a time. The guitar, I guess, is similar to the piano in that like you can create some dissonance, some percussiveness while you're still playing some melodies over it, right? Cecil took full advantage of his piano, and he created something new. And I think there are other examples of that, but I think the record that you have, Silent Tongues, that one's it's great because he's playing by himself, so you can really hear him just get all the way out there, but bring it back in, and he can play traditional piano, right? He can play traditional jazz
Sure.
piano, but he takes it one step further, and it's exciting to hear him do that on his own
Yeah.
in front of an audience.
Yeah, the thing is that, I mean, look, when you're going to go to Cecil Taylor, in terms of Silent Tongues, that's really one of the records to have. As a matter of fact, it's the only one I have. I have an original, and I'm looking forward to fixing up my scratching copy. But, I mean, you can go back to the Blue Note records also. He did Unit Structures and
Yeah, great one.
Conquistador for Blue Note. Those are big too. But, I mean, if you had to really look at the records that you need to pick up for him, that Cecil Taylor record is one of them. Where it is that I liked it is, again, it feeds into the way it is that I kind of beginning to see your catalog as it fits my archive. You're digging areas where I was happy to see that, and I'm happy that a new light is shed on this stuff that wasn't, I mean, I remember coming up, maybe it's because I started listening to jazz during the CD era, but I don't remember Cecil Taylor coming up too often in my conversations, those early conversations. It's fun that it's coming up now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he was someone that took me a minute. I'll be honest. As did Sun Ra. Even the first time I heard Sun Ra, it doesn't digest easily. It's an acquired taste, right? Um,
Yeah.
and it's Cecil is it's a record you put on and you can kind of hear differently every time you put it on, right?
Yep.
You got to be in the mood. You got to be. It's not necessarily what I want to put on at 8 o'clock in the morning, but it's adventurous. It's kind of takes you on a journey, especially if you light up like you did before this podcast. That helps.
Well,
But
I saw him
go ahead.
live. I saw him live
Okay.
about 20 years
Yeah.
ago. And it was during the Montreal Jazz Festival. I've told this story before. And it was him in a trio. Okay, so him, a drummer, and an upright bass. And same thing. The place was full. Now, the thing is with a lot of these places when you go to these jazz festival type places, people go for the event. People will, the tickets will sell for the event. The tickets will sell for the fact that it's a name. A lot of times people don't know what they're buying. They don't know the material too much. And look, Cecil Taylor, in terms of his recorded output, it's not the most commonly known catalog either. So you're buying it because, okay, well, he's an old guy and he's going to die one day. A lot of people, right? So he begins playing, brother. He begins playing. And the bass player is taking a stick and putting it between his bass and basically doing prepared bass is what he's doing, as fucking Cecil is pounding on his piano. He's not playing he's playing the drums on his piano. And people don't know what to do. I'm looking around me, and this is a proper place, right? So this is a proper concert hall. Everyone's seated, and and nobody knows what to make out of this. And it's just, they figure maybe he's starting, no, but the whole show winds up like this. So slowly but surely, people start walking out. And he doesn't give a fuck. 0 fucks given. He just keeps doing exactly the same thing, right?
Right.
And there's a steady stream of people going out. Now, the place was a packed house to begin with, okay? I mean, as packed as those places come, there's comfortable seating, so there's space. So as people are going, you can see them walking down, the wide aisles. It's obvious he's fucking losing the crowd there. 0 fucks given. This guy just keeps playing and people are filing out of the place. And he's fucking stomping on the ground, and that's part of what he's doing. At this point, there's a bit of a steady stream. Dude, doesn't he get up? And he starts fucking doing these pirouettes around this fucking piano. He starts dancing ballet. And it's like, I'd even heard in the crowd, it's like one person, like, whoa. And for me, but you don't understand, that's when the biggest group of people left. The guy saw...
He's an artist. I mean,
yeah.
And if you go to see Cecil Taylor, I mean, not to say you should expect him to get up and dance on the piano.
Well, he died this year, right?
I mean, yeah. And if you go to see him, you got to know what to expect. You're not gonna get cool jazz like we talked about earlier, right? You're not gonna get big band. You're not gonna get anything that resembles any of that. So, for me, someone like Cecil was a little bit easier to get into, I think, maybe than he would have been, because I grew up in the punk rock world first and foremost. Before I got into anything else, that's where I grew up, and like noise music, hardcore, these things, they're abrasive, right? They're not always pretty sounding.
It's entertainment through pain, you would say.
Yeah. I mean, even some of those early Sonic Youth records, some of the stuff that Nels Cline does on his own, his solo stuff that kind of borders on jazz and noise. That stuff was a good entry point for me to someone like Cecil.
Absolutely.
Right? Someone like, Sun Ra, someone like Ornette. You get out there, and there's parallels to psychedelic music. There's parallels to, it's its own genre in a lot of ways, because you're not going to get the same kind of people listening to.
You're so right.
Cecil.
You're so right, because you see, that's where it is that you made a connection. For me now, we made 2 different connections there that I never figured out before. The connection to Thelonious Monk, who also danced, in the middle of a performance, and did the percussive thing. But yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of, I can understand anybody who listens to industrial or punk or any of that liking Cecil, because Cecil is fucking Jackson Pollock. You know what I mean?
It is punk rock, right?
It is, absolutely. Using a piano.
It's fucking punk rock.
Using a piano. He's fucking demolishing his piano. And when he was this, dude, I'm talking 20 years ago, so the guy was in his 60s. He was in his, demolishing the fucking piano. Yeah, you know what? If you want to call that a punk rock show, yeah. That's why it is that I included this record that you have live in Montreux, okay, The Silent Tongues, in a record that I would put in kind of like if I had to put together a half dozen records. Not because it would serve as the record that would be easy to get into. To me, that would be Dave Brubeck's Take 5. Okay, that's an easy one, right? That's But this is even beyond a fucking curveball. This is the absolute other end of the fucking spectrum where it's like,
Right.
you know. But for people who need to kind of like find their way in, we all had our entry point into jazz. Mine was Charles Mingus because of the blues, you know.
Right.
I can see Cecil Taylor being the entry point for people who are into industrial music. You like Throbbing Gristle, you like Suicide, you might like Cecil Taylor.
Yeah, you know, and I don't know that that was my entry to jazz, but definitely to free jazz, which I treat almost as a very different genre. I mean, I have to be in a very different mood if I want to listen to Dave Brubeck versus Cecil, and it's great. I mean, it's just they don't necessarily belong in the same category for that reason, and I see a lot more through lines to noise music, to psychedelic music, to punk rock, in some of the free jazz stuff than I do to, blues or traditional jazz even.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that's why it is that it makes it fun to speak to you, because while we're putting this together, right? This is about putting the stories together. It's about connecting the dots. So there are no wrong dots. We all come. Our musical history, our musical tapestry, our personal musical tapestry comes from different places. So for me, you sending me your records, Andrew, is you introducing me to you. You know what I'm saying? And through these shows,
Right.
what it is that we're doing is we're connecting dots that were previously not connected. That is precisely why you do something like this. That is why a show like this is comparable to the experience of listening to vinyl, because it's qualitative. We're adding something different. We're not just listening to the music we're adding an extra element. That's what vinyl is, man. That's what these stories are, you know?
Yeah, I hope we're adding something. I hope people enjoy this. But yeah, no, it's everyone comes to this music from different places, right? And it touches everyone in a different way. But that's the cool thing about it. I mean, I know, like, I'm sure you know where you were at when you heard Monk for the first time, or so
Yes, I did.
Some of these records, they mean a lot to a lot of people, and it's always interesting to talk about it because it's vinyl or otherwise, right? The music really touches people.
It does. Well, the thing is with a show like this is that it's forced me to look at my collection from another perspective. So I always look forward to that. And there's going to be so many more, And listen, as far as I'm concerned, brother, if we enjoy nerding out about this, there's other people that enjoy nerding out about it also. I started this entire show because I just wanted to talk about music. So I'm happy that you kind of joined me today. This was fun, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it.
We're going to catch you in Detroit next week, right? And
I'll be there.
Yeah, man. And a lot of the records that you see as part of the prize, including the Cecil Taylor and the Roland Hanna, this Dave Brubeck, are all available now at Org Music and everywhere. Thank
Get
you.
them.
Get them.
Get them at your independent record store. We always like to support our friends there.
Get them while they're hot.
I'm gonna plug that.
They're hot, like flapjacks. Like flapjacks, they're hot. I'm trying to turn this fucking thing off.
They're hot, but that Dave Brubeck one is pretty cool.
This is very cool. So it's kind of like you got a little bit of fucking surf and turf, you understand? Sweet and salty all together. You want a bit of salty nuts? You buy some Cecil Taylor. You want something a little sweeter? You put on this Dave Brubeck and you have fun. Andrew, you rule. That was fun.
Thanks, Sam.
Later, dude.
Talk to you soon.
Hey, folks. Welcome to Vinyl Junkies. I'm joined here today for our topic by Andrew Rossiter of Org Music. Hey, Andrew.